What would you do if one day you picked up your phone and found your own name listed among the dead? Would you rush home and embrace your family? Or would you realize that the people who wanted you dead the most were the very people who shared your last name? My name is Michael Carter. 5 years ago, the entire country believed I had died. When my yacht disappeared off the coast of Florida, my body was never found. The news called it a tragic accident. My friends cried. My business partners attended my funeral. Hundreds of flowers filled the church. Even my parents shed tears in front of television cameras. My mother looked into the lens and said, "I only wish I could hold my son one more time." Millions of people believed her, but I knew the truth. It was the greatest performance of her entire life. Because while she was crying, the life insurance payout was already being deposited into my family's bank accounts. While my father bowed his head in prayer, he was signing the paperwork to take control of my company. And my younger brother, the man carrying my portrait at my memorial, was also the first one to drive away in a brand new Ferrari, paid for with my money. The truth is, I never died. A cargo ship found me after I had spent nearly 2 days drifting across the open ocean. When I woke up, my passport was gone, my phone was gone, my wallet was gone. I had nothing. I didn't even know that my family had already held my funeral. Not until I finally returned to the United States and saw my own death certificate. According to the law, I was dead. To my friends, I was dead. To every bank, I was dead. To the company I had built from nothing, I was dead. But there was one thing no one knew. The man standing in front of that death certificate was still breathing. At first, I thought all I had to do was show up. I believed everything would be fixed. Then an old friend of mine, who worked in the insurance industry, said something that changed everything. "Michael, if they were willing to declare you dead, they'll be willing to make sure you stay that way." That was the moment I disappeared. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted the truth. I wanted to know who had stolen my life, who had planned every step, and what would happen if the man they had buried 5 years earlier suddenly walked through the doors of his own memorial service. Before the entire country believed I was dead, I thought I was one of the lucky ones. I owned a growing business, a beautiful house overlooking the ocean, a bank account large enough that I never had to worry about the future. And most importantly, I had a family I believed would always stand by my side. My father, Richard Carter. He was a strict man, quiet, always dressed in a crisp white shirt, always arriving at least 10 minutes early. When I was a kid, he used to tell me, "In life, you can lose your money, but never lose your honor." I believed those words for more than 30 years. My mother, Helen Carter, she never forgot anyone's birthday. She knew I drank my coffee black. She knew I hated onions. She knew that whenever I was under pressure, I'd unconsciously tap my fingers against the table. Then there was my younger brother, Daniel, 4 years younger than me. Smart, charming, the kind of person who could make everyone like him within minutes. If I built my life through discipline, Daniel could walk into a room, flash a smile, and convince everyone he had worked just as hard as I had. But I never envied him. He was my little brother. I truly believed that my success was our family's success. When I was 32, I founded Carter Atlantic Logistics. At the beginning, it was nothing more than 3 employees, a tiny office above an auto repair shop, 2 aging trucks, and a bank loan that almost didn't get approved. I worked 16 hours a day. I called every client myself, reviewed every contract myself, drove to the ports myself, whenever an employee called in sick. Some nights, I slept in my office chair, using my rolled-up jacket as a pillow. 5 years later, we had grown to more than 200 employees, contracts with 3 major ports, offices in Miami, Charleston, and Houston. Annual revenue? Over $60 million. My father looked proud. At least, that's what I believed. He would introduce me to his friends by saying, "This is Michael. My son built everything from the ground up." My mother kept every newspaper article written about me. She carefully cut out each page and placed them inside a leather scrapbook. Daniel joined the company during our 6th year. Not because I needed him, because my parents wanted me to help my brother. He had already failed with 2 startups. He was drowning in credit card debt, and he had just gone through a divorce. One Sunday evening, my mother called me. "Michael, your brother needs a second chance." I didn't hesitate. I hired Daniel as our director of business development. His salary? $200,000 a year, plus bonuses, a company car, and full access to our corporate apartment in New York. On his first day, Daniel hugged me tightly. "You saved my life, brother." I smiled, patted him on the shoulder, and answered, "We're family." I had no idea those 2 words would eventually cost me everything. For the first 2 years, Daniel actually did a decent job. He brought in several new clients, he knew how to build relationships, he always knew exactly what people wanted to hear. But gradually, I started noticing something. He didn't just want to work for me, he wanted to become me. Daniel began using company vehicles for personal trips. He brought his friends to private client events. He introduced himself as a co-founder of Carter Atlantic Logistics. One day, a client actually called me Daniel. When I corrected him, he looked confused. "I'm sorry." Daniel told us he was the one running the company. I called Daniel into my office. He laughed. "It's just easier that way. The clients don't need every little detail." I looked him straight in the eye. "The important detail is that this company belongs to me. You're an employee." The smile disappeared from his face, only for a second. Then it came back. "Of course, I understand." But I knew he didn't. Or maybe he simply refused to. Everything changed when we received an acquisition offer. An international logistics corporation wanted to purchase 60% of Carter Atlantic Logistics. The valuation was nearly $50 million. It was the largest number my family had ever heard. I invited my parents and Daniel over for dinner. I wanted them to hear the news from me before they read about it in the papers. The moment I mentioned $50 million, my mother covered her mouth in shock. My father slowly nodded. Daniel said nothing. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't smile. He simply asked, "If you sell, how much do you actually get?" I set my wine glass down. "Around 30 million after taxes." Daniel leaned back. 30 million. He repeated the number, as if he wanted to memorize every digit. Then my father asked, "Are you going to share part of the company with Daniel?" The question caught me completely off guard. Daniel had only worked there for 2 years. He hadn't invested a single dollar. He had never taken any of the risks. "Still," I answered calmly, "I've already prepared a bonus for him." $1 million. Daniel stared at me. 1 million? His voice sounded like I had just insulted him. I kept my composure. "That's an enormous bonus. It's more money than you've earned in years." My mother reached over and placed her hand on mine. "Michael, your brother helped grow this company. You should be fair." I gently pulled my hand away. "I am being fair." My father frowned. "Families shouldn't treat each other like strangers." I looked around the table. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was surrounded by strangers. I had built the company from nothing. I mortgaged my first house, borrowed money, worked until I was completely exhausted. Yet somehow, in their eyes, everything I had built had become family property. I looked at them and said, "I haven't decided to sell. And even if I do, that money is still mine." Silence filled the room. Daniel lowered his head, cut another piece of steak, and quietly said, "Of course, it's your money." But this time, I heard something different in his voice. Not disappointment, hatred. 1 week later, Daniel walked into my office, closed the door, sat across from me. "So, did you reject the offer?" I nodded. "They wanted control of the company. I'm not ready for that. Daniel clenched his jaw. You turned down $50 million? That wasn't your money to spend. He let out a short laugh, cold, joyless. No, of course not. He stood up and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned back. You know what your problem is, Michael? You think you're untouchable. I frowned. What does that mean? Daniel shrugged. Nothing. It's just, one day, you won't be here anymore. Then he walked out. At the time, I dismissed it as nothing more than an angry remark. I didn't report it to Human Resources. I didn't tell my attorney. I didn't even make a note of the conversation. Because Daniel was my brother. And people have a dangerous habit of forgiving the most frightening words when they come from someone they love. 3 months later, my father invited me over to the house. When I arrived, Daniel was already there. My mother placed a stack of documents on the table. It's just some family paperwork. I opened the folder. It was a power of attorney. It authorized my father to manage my assets if I ever became unable to run the company. I looked at him. Why do I need to sign this? He answered calmly. You travel all the time. You're constantly flying. You spend a lot of time out on the water. If something ever happens, the family needs to know what to do, I kept reading. The document didn't just give him authority over my personal assets. It gave him control of my company shares, my investment accounts, and every one of my insurance policies. I closed the folder. My attorney will review this first. My mother sighed. Don't you trust your own father? I looked at her. This isn't about trust. It's about the law. Daniel was standing by the window. His back was turned toward me, but reflected in the glass. I caught a glimpse of him smiling, just for a second. When I looked directly at him, the smile was gone. My father took the folder back. That's fine. Let your attorney review it. We have nothing to hide. The very next day, Daniel called me. He apologized for everything. He said he'd had time to think. He wanted us to start over. Then he suggested a short yacht trip, just the two of us, 3 days. From Miami to the Bahamas. No business, no contracts, just two brothers. I hesitated. Then my mother called. She said Daniel genuinely wanted to repair our relationship. My father sent me a message too. Family matters more than money. In the end, I agreed. What I didn't know was that while I was packing for the trip, my family was already preparing my death certificate. I never imagined that a 3-day trip could erase an entire person's life. That morning, the marina in Miami was packed. Daniel arrived before I did. He was standing beside a 40-foot yacht, smiling, waving at me, looking exactly like a younger brother, excited to spend a few days with his older sibling. Beautiful boat, isn't it? He asked. I nodded. It couldn't have been cheap. Daniel smiled. A friend let me borrow it. I didn't ask another question. At the time, I had absolutely no reason to doubt him. We left the harbor just before 10 that morning. The ocean was calm. The sky was perfectly clear. Daniel had packed everything: steaks, seafood, fine wine, cigars, and a bottle of whiskey. He claimed he'd been saving for years, waiting for a special occasion. That afternoon, we sat on the deck together. For the first time in years, we actually talked like brothers again. Daniel brought up our childhood, fishing trips with our father, camping weekends, baseball games in the backyard. For a while, I honestly believed maybe I had been wrong about him. Maybe money had simply driven us apart. Maybe this was our chance to become a family again. Around 8 that evening, Daniel poured us each a glass of whiskey. To family, he raised his glass. I smiled and clinked mine against his. Without a single doubt. After only a few sips, I started feeling dizzy. At first, I assumed it had been a long time since I'd had real whiskey. But this wasn't ordinary intoxication. My eyelids became unbearably heavy. My arms felt numb. A loud ringing filled my ears. I tried to stand, but my legs refused to cooperate. Daniel immediately stepped toward me and grabbed my shoulder. You okay? I nodded, even though I could barely keep my balance. Everything around me began fading into darkness. The last thing I saw was Daniel. He leaned over me and stared directly into my eyes. The friendly smile was gone. What replaced it was a look so cold, I had never seen anything like it. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Don't blame me. You're the only one, standing in everyone's way." After that, everything went black. I don't remember losing consciousness. I only remember the freezing cold, salt water crashing against my face, over and over again. When I opened my eyes, the sky above me was pitch black. Every direction was nothing but open ocean. The yacht was gone. Daniel was gone. There wasn't a single light anywhere. I was clinging to a large piece of floating timber. Every inch of my body hurt. Blood was running down the side of my head. My left shoulder barely moved. I screamed for help. No one answered. I shouted Daniel's name. The ocean answered instead. For 2 days, I drifted across the sea. The sun burned my skin during the day. The nights were cold enough to make my body go numb. I drank rainwater whenever the clouds appeared. I bit my own lip until it bled, just to stay conscious. More than once, I truly believed I was going to die. Late in the afternoon, on the second day, I saw it. A cargo ship. With the last bit of strength I had left, I pulled off my shirt and waved it above my head. Then, everything faded away again. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in a medical cabin. An Asian man stood beside my bed. He introduced himself as the ship's captain. He told me his crew had found me floating on a piece of timber. "If we'd arrived an hour later," he said quietly, "you probably wouldn't have survived." "My phone?" I asked. "Where is it?" He shook his head. "When we found you, you weren't carrying anything. You had nothing, except the clothes on your back." "What about the yacht?" I asked. He looked at me and slowly shook his head again. "We never found one. There wasn't any wreckage. That cargo ship wasn't heading back to the United States. It was already crossing the Atlantic, on its way to Europe. I had a severe infection, a concussion, and multiple injuries. The doctors refused to let me travel. They warned me that leaving too soon could kill me. I had no choice except to stay. For weeks, I tried to contact my family, but I couldn't remember a single phone number. My phone had disappeared with the yacht. I couldn't access my email. Every account required identity verification. My passport, my driver's license, my wallet, everything was gone. On paper, it was almost as if I no longer existed. 3 months later, my health finally improved. I returned to America with an emergency passport and one simple belief. My family must have been desperately searching for me. I imagined my mother running into my arms, my father breaking down in tears, Daniel blaming himself for failing to save his brother. I imagined it over and over again until the taxi stopped in front of my house. The gate had a different lock. My car was gone. A small sign hung near the front door. Sold. I stood there, unable to understand what I was seeing. Then my neighbor noticed me. His face turned white. He stumbled backward. His voice trembled. "That's impossible. I went to your funeral." That was the moment I finally understood. To the entire world, Michael Carter was already dead. I stood outside the house, the place I'd called home, for nearly 10 years. But now, it belonged to someone else. My neighbor kept staring at me, as if he'd just seen a ghost. He shook his head over and over again. "Michael, if that's really you, this isn't possible." I looked at him. "Where's my family?" He hesitated for a few seconds. Then he answered, They moved to Palm Beach, a new mansion. I heard, after you died, they sold this place, bought something much bigger. Everyone said, they paid for it, with the insurance money. I couldn't say a word. Insurance money. So it was true. My family had already collected the payout. I finally asked, didn't they look for me? He frowned, confused by the question. Look for you? Michael, they held one of the biggest memorial services I've ever seen. The press was there, television crews. They even started a charity, in your name. Your father gave a speech, he said. He would spend the rest of his life honoring his son's final wishes. I just stood there, feeling colder with every passing second. That night, I rented the cheapest motel room I could find. For the first time, I searched my own name online. Hundreds of results appeared. Businessman Michael Carter presumed dead at sea. The Carter family mourns the loss of their son. The Michael Carter Foundation officially launches. I opened every article, every photograph. My father, holding my mother. Daniel standing beside them, wearing dark sunglasses, his head lowered, pretending to cry. If I hadn't known the truth, I probably would have believed it too. I would have believed they were the most heartbroken family in America. Then I found something that stopped me cold. A financial news article. Carter Atlantic Logistics officially changes ownership. New CEO, Daniel Carter. I read the headline, again and again and again. It couldn't be true. I'd never signed ownership over, never sold my shares, never gave anyone authority to control the company. So how had Daniel become its owner? The next morning, I walked into my bank. I handed over my emergency passport and asked to access my account. The teller entered my information. Then she froze. Her expression changed immediately. I'm sorry. The system shows that you're deceased. Your accounts have already been closed. I tried to explain. I am Michael Carter. She shook her head politely. I'm very sorry, sir. But according to federal records, Michael Carter died months ago. I'm not authorized to give you any information. I went to the Social Security office. The answer was the same. Deceased. I went to the DMV. They refused to issue me a driver's license. I went to the IRS. They told me my tax identification had been permanently closed. I even tried hiring an attorney. He listened carefully, then asked me one simple question. Can you prove that you never died? I said nothing, because I couldn't. For the next 3 weeks, I lived like a ghost. No bank account, no job, no home, no legal identity. The man, who had once owned a company worth tens of millions of dollars, couldn't even open a checking account. Then one evening, I received a phone call. David Brooks, my college roommate, now an insurance fraud investigator. David stared at me for almost an entire minute before saying a single word. My God, it really is you. I told him everything, every detail, without leaving anything out. He never interrupted. He simply listened. When I finished, he asked me one question. Michael, are you absolutely sure your family believes you're dead? I nodded. David slowly shook his head. No, I don't think they do. I think they know you're still alive. I stared at him. What are you talking about? David opened his laptop and pulled up a report. Your insurance claim. Normally, when there's no body, insurance companies investigate for years, sometimes even longer. But your claim was approved in only 4 months. I frowned. What does that mean? David lowered his voice. It means someone prepared everything perfectly. The witnesses, the statements, the timeline, the evidence. It all fits together, like a carefully written script. He looked directly into my eyes. Michael, if this is insurance fraud, the people who benefited didn't just commit financial fraud, they conspired to erase a human being. I took a deep breath. So, what do I do now? David remained silent for a long moment. Then he closed the laptop. Don't show yourself, and don't contact your family. From this moment on, they're no longer your family. They're suspects. I'll help you. But we need evidence. A lot of evidence. I want to know who forged your death certificate, who approved the insurance claim, who transferred ownership of your company, and who profited the most from your death. I looked at an old family photo, stored on David's phone. 4 people, standing side by side, smiling. Once upon a time, I believed that picture represented the safest place in my life. Now, I finally understood the truth. Some monsters don't hide in the dark. They sit across the dinner table. They smile at you. They tell you they love you. And then one day, they decide you should die. I didn't go home. I didn't visit my parents. I didn't knock on the front door of Daniel's new mansion. Because if David was right, the moment they discovered I was still alive, I probably wouldn't survive a second time. 3 days later, David introduced me to a woman. Her name was Sarah Collins, an FBI special agent. She didn't shake my hand. Instead, she placed a thick case file on the table, looked me in the eyes, and asked, "Do you know who you are right now?" I gave her a bitter smile. "A dead man." She slowly shook her head. "No. According to the federal system, you no longer exist. A dead person, at least once existed. But you have been almost completely erased from every database." She opened the file. The very first page was my death certificate. Every signature, every official seal, the medical examiner's report, the accident report, everything looked terrifyingly perfect. Sarah pointed to one line. "Do you see anything unusual?" I looked closer. The doctor who had supposedly confirmed my death was listed by name. Then Sarah said, "That doctor lost his medical license 2 years before you officially died." I looked at her. "So," she nodded. "The paperwork was legalized, but someone used the identity of a doctor who was no longer practicing. That was only the beginning." Over the following weeks, Sarah and David followed every lead, every signature, every financial transaction, every phone call, every email. And with every new piece of evidence, the picture became even darker. The insurance payout was $12 million. The money was first transferred into a trust account. 3 days later, it was distributed. $6 million to my father's account, $3 million to Daniel. The remaining $3 million passed through 3 shell companies before disappearing completely. Carter Atlantic Logistics was no longer my company. Only 2 months after I was declared dead, Daniel called a shareholders meeting. He announced that I had secretly signed a final will. A will that transferred complete control of the company to my younger brother. I stared at the copy. It looked exactly like my signature, at least at first glance. Sarah broke the silence. "Our forensic experts examined it. It's a forgery. But it was created using hundreds of genuine samples of your signature." I closed my eyes. For years, Daniel had been the one bringing contracts to my office. Thousands of documents, thousands of signatures. Never once did I imagine those signatures would one day become the weapon used to erase my life. 3 months later, Sarah called me. "We found something." She played security footage from outside a law office, recorded 3 weeks before the yacht trip. The video showed my father, Daniel, and an attorney. They entered the building at 9 in the morning. They didn't leave until almost 1 in the afternoon. Sarah looked at me. "That attorney drafted the forged will. He filed your death certificate, and he represented the family. During the insurance claim, the same man handled everything. The FBI immediately began surveillance. But Sarah warned me, we still can't arrest them. Financial fraud requires direct evidence. For now, their entire defense is that they honestly believed you were dead." Time passed. 1 year. then 2. Under the Witness Protection Program, I was given a new legal identity. I was no longer Michael Carter. I learned how to live as someone else. During the day, I worked as a logistics consultant for a small transportation company. At night, I studied every page of the investigation, every document, every detail. I wasn't living for revenge, I was living for the day. The truth finally came to light. During the 3rd year, everything changed. Daniel's former accountant asked to meet with the FBI. He said, "I don't want to take this secret to my grave." He turned over more than 3,000 emails, hundreds of invoices, and a hard drive. Inside it was an audio recording, recorded 10 days before the yacht trip. Sarah pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. "If Michael disappears, everything will finally be over." Then Daniel spoke. "He'll never come back." The room fell completely silent. No one said a word. Because it was no longer suspicion. It was proof of conspiracy. During the 4th year, the FBI uncovered even more. The family attorney had accepted more than $2 million to forge legal documents. The doctor, who signed my death certificate, had never even seen a body. He simply signed the paperwork in exchange for $500,000. Even the insurance investigator had accepted bribes to speed up the approval process. Every link in the chain had a price. The only thing that seemed worthless was my life. Then, the 5th year arrived. Sarah walked into my office. In her hands were federal search warrants, arrest warrants, and a sealed indictment. For the first time in years, she smiled. "Michael, it's time for the dead to come back to life." I looked at her. "When?" She placed a black invitation on the table. Gold lettering was embossed across the front. The 5th memorial of Michael Carter. My family was preparing. A 5-year memorial service. Hundreds of guests, members of the press, business partners, major donors. Sarah looked at me. "Would you like to make an appearance?" I picked up the invitation, stared at it for a very long time. Then I quietly nodded. "I'll be there. Not to get my money back, not for revenge. I only want one thing. When the FBI puts the handcuffs on them, I want them to look into the eyes of the man they tried so hard to kill. 5 years. 1,826 days. That was how long my family lived in luxury, because I had supposedly died, while I had to learn how to survive as someone who legally didn't exist. But eventually, the day arrived. The memorial service was held at a luxury hotel in Palm Beach. More than 300 guests, business executives, corporate partners, local politicians, members of the press, television cameras, everything had been prepared to perfection. A massive portrait of me stood in the center of the stage. Beneath it were the words, "Forever in our hearts." I stood across the street, watching in silence. No one recognized me. 5 years had changed everything. My hair was shorter, my face carried new lines. The scar on my temple was the ocean's final gift. I was wearing a black suit, not to attend my own memorial, but to bury the lies. Sarah Collins walked over and handed me a tiny earpiece. "The tactical teams are in position. Every exit is covered. All arrest warrants have been signed." I took a deep breath. This time, "Don't let them escape." She nodded. "They won't." At exactly 10 o'clock, the ceremony began. Daniel was the first to step onto the stage. He wore a dark navy suit. On his wrist was the watch I had given him for his 30th birthday. He picked up the microphone. His voice trembled. "Today marks 5 years since my brother left us forever." He lowered his head. wiped away fake tears. The audience sat in complete silence. If I hadn't known the truth, I probably would have applauded too. Next came my mother. She looked older, but she still knew exactly when to cry. There hasn't been a single day that I haven't missed my son. I would give up everything just to hold Michael one more time. I clenched my fists. 5 years, not once, had she tried to find me. The final speaker was my father. He slowly walked to the podium and looked across the room. Michael always believed family was the most important thing. We will continue living according to the values he left behind. Applause filled the ballroom. Then, Sarah's voice came through my earpiece. Now. I walked forward, pushed open the ballroom doors. The sound of the hinges was barely audible, but it was enough to make every head turn toward me. I walked inside, slowly. One step, then another. The entire room fell completely silent. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand. It shattered across the floor. Daniel saw me first. Every trace of color drained from his face. His eyes widened. The microphone slipped from his fingers. My father turned around. He stared at me. His lips began to tremble. "No, that's impossible." My mother shot to her feet, covered her mouth, then screamed. "Michael!" Her voice echoed through the ballroom. I stopped, at the foot of the stage, looked at each member of my family, without anger, without hatred, only calm. Then I spoke. "I'm sorry. I'm late. I hope my memorial service isn't over yet." Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. More than 300 people could only stare at me, as though they were witnessing a man returning from the dead. Daniel stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No, you're dead. I threw." He froze. Too late. He had already revealed what no one should have known. I looked directly at him. "What did you just say?" Daniel's face turned pale. Sweat poured down his forehead. He desperately tried to recover. "I meant, everyone thought, but nobody was listening anymore." At that exact moment, the ballroom doors burst open. More than 20 FBI agents stormed inside. Sarah Collins led the team. She raised her badge. "FBI, nobody move!" The ballroom erupted into chaos. Every television camera swiveled toward the stage. Sarah stopped in front of my father. She began reading the arrest warrant. "Richard Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery of federal documents, financial fraud, and money laundering." My father's knees gave out beneath him. He couldn't say a word. 2 other agents moved toward Daniel. He spun around and ran. He didn't make it more than 15 feet before agents tackled him to the floor. The sound of handcuffs echoed across the ballroom. Daniel looked at me, screaming, "Michael, you have to help me! I'm your brother!" I didn't answer. 5 years earlier, while I drifted alone in the middle of the ocean, I had called his name too. The only thing that answered me was the sea. My mother collapsed onto her knees, crying uncontrollably. "My son, I'm sorry. I never wanted any of this." Sarah calmly placed a thick folder in front of her. "Mrs. Carter, this is your recorded statement." She pressed play. My mother's own voice filled the room. "If Michael were gone, everything would be easier." She froze, unable to speak, unable to deny it. Sarah looked at me and quietly nodded. "It's over." I looked around the ballroom, at every guest, at every camera, at the enormous portrait of myself. Then I walked over, carefully lifted it off the stand, and leaned it against the wall. I didn't want anyone mourning, a man who had never died, because today, the dead man had finally come home. And this time, the thing being buried wasn't me, it was the lies that had survived for the past 5 years. 3 months later, the federal trial officially began. For the first time in 5 years, I walked into a courtroom under my real name. No more false identity, no more hiding. I was Michael Carter. Again, the FBI's evidence left the defense with almost nowhere to run. More than 3,000 emails, recorded phone calls, the trail of the insurance money, forged contracts, a forged will, and finally, the testimony of the family's attorney. After he agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors, he admitted that Daniel was the first person to suggest the plan. But the final decision came from my father, Richard Carter. According to his testimony, my father said, "Michael will never share the company. If we want everything, there's only one way." My mother, Helen Carter, never forged any documents herself, but she knew. She knew about the entire plan. She knew I could still be alive, and she chose to remain silent. After 8 weeks of testimony, the jury returned. The verdict was read. Richard Carter, guilty. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, financial fraud, forgery of federal documents, money laundering. Sentence: 35 years in federal prison. Daniel Carter, guilty on every single charge. Conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, grand theft, fraud, obstruction of justice. Sentence: 29 years in federal prison. Helen Carter, guilty as an accessory and for concealing a felony. Sentence: 12 years in federal prison. Every asset purchased with insurance money or stolen funds was seized by the court. The company, the mansion, the luxury cars, the investment accounts, everything. Part of the recovered assets was returned to me. The rest was used to compensate the other victims. 1 year later, I never returned to run Carter Atlantic Logistics. Instead, I sold my remaining ownership, closed the final chapter of my past. I moved to a small coastal town, opened a consulting business, and finally began living a peaceful life. No more endless board meetings, no more contracts worth millions of dollars, no more sleepless nights trying to protect something that should never have been taken in the first place. Someone once asked me, "Do you hate your family?" I stayed silent for a long time. Then I answered, "I don't hate them anymore." Because hatred is the last chain that keeps me tied to the past. I only regret that the people I trusted most were also the people willing to bury me alive for money. If my story has a lesson, it is this: betrayal rarely begins with hatred. It begins with greed. And greed can turn an entire family into complete strangers. Thank you for spending your time with Veritale and staying until the very end of this story. If today's story made you think or touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps Veritale continue bringing you powerful stories that leave a lasting impact. And always remember, every story leaves a lesson. Every lesson shapes a life. This is Veritale.